My name is Harrison Cole. I'm 64 years old. I built a life with these two hands. Construction work, double shifts, cold sandwiches in a truck cab at midnight, all for one person. My son, Finn. I raised him alone from the age of 7. No help, no backup, just the two of us against the world. So when his wedding day arrived, I pressed my best suit, polished my shoes, and drove 2 hours to watch my boy marry the woman he loved. I walked into that reception hall smiling. I left that hall forever changed, because somewhere between the gold centerpieces and the champagne towers and the 200 guests in their finest clothes, I found my seat. Table 14, tucked in the far corner, behind the photographers, partially hidden by a tripod. I stood there holding that little card with my table number, and I thought, surely there's been a mistake. Surely there was no mistake. And just when I had convinced myself to sit down, stay quiet, and survive the evening with whatever dignity I had left, a stranger I had never met in my life leaned close and whispered 4 words that cracked something open inside me. 4 words that changed everything that happened next. What that stranger said, and what I did with it, silenced an entire reception hall. This is that story. Before we go one word further, and if you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people who were supposed to see you most clearly, this story is going to hit different. Subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single chapter. Drop a comment below. Just say Table 14, so I know you're here. And like this because the algorithm buries stories like this, and real people need to find it. The story starts now, and I promise you, you will not see this ending coming. The morning of Finn's wedding, I woke up before my alarm. That hadn't happened in years. I'm not a man who gets sentimental easily. 30 years of construction work will sand that softness right off you. But that morning, I lay in bed in the gray light of 5 a.m., and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something that took me a minute to name: pride. Deep, quiet, overwhelming pride. I thought about Finn at 7 years old, standing at the kitchen door in his dinosaur pajamas, asking me why his mother's car wasn't in the driveway anymore. I thought about the way I knelt down on that cold kitchen floor and looked him in the eye and told him, "It's just going to be us now, buddy, but I promise you that's enough." I thought about every school morning I packed his lunch, every baseball game I attended in muddy work boots straight from a job site, every college application I read out loud at the kitchen table because he wanted a second pair of eyes. Every single night I checked that the door was locked and my kid was safe before I let myself sleep. 30 years. And now, my boy was getting married. I took my time getting ready that morning. I had bought the suit 3 months earlier. Charcoal gray, proper fit, nothing flashy. I wasn't a flashy man, but I wanted to look like a man who belonged at his son's wedding. I polished my shoes twice. I checked my tie 4 times in the bathroom mirror. I trimmed my beard carefully. When I looked at myself in the full-length mirror before leaving the house, I thought, "Harrison, you did all right." The drive was 2 hours. I had been given the venue address by Finn via text 3 weeks earlier. No call. Just a text with a link to the location and a message that said, "Dad, ceremony at 2, reception doors open at 5. Can't wait to see you." I hadn't spoken to Finn much in the weeks leading up to the wedding. He was busy. I understood that. Nora handled everything, the planning, the vendors, the guest list, the seating. Finn had told me that early on. "Nora's got it all under control, Dad. She's incredible at this stuff." I had nodded and said nothing because that's what you do when your son is happy. You step back. You make room. You trust. I arrived at the venue at 4:45 p.m., 15 minutes early because I was raised to never be late to anything that mattered. The ceremony had been beautiful. I sat in the 3rd row, not the front, but close enough. I watched Finn stand at that altar and I felt my chest tighten with something too big to swallow quietly. I kept my composure. I'm good at that. When the officiant asked who gave this man to be married, I almost laughed. Nobody had asked me that question. That was fine. That was modern. I clapped when they kissed. I shook hands in the foyer. I smiled at people I didn't recognize who smiled back at me like they knew exactly who I was. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. Then the reception doors opened and the usher, young kid, maybe 22, very professional, checked my name against his clipboard and handed me a small ivory card. Table 14. I looked at the card. Then I looked at the room. The reception hall was stunning, I'll give Nora that. She had exquisite taste. Long tables draped in ivory linen, gold candlesticks, floral arrangements that must have cost more than my first car. Tables 1 through 6 were arranged in a wide semicircle around the dance floor and the head table, close, intimate, warm. I could see family I recognized at those tables, Nora's parents. Her sister Hazel, who I had met twice, positioned right at table 2 like royalty, Finn's college friends at table 5. I walked further into the room looking for table 14. I found it in the far left corner, tucked behind a photographer's equipment station, a standing light on a tall silver pole. A camera bag open on a chair, a full-height tripod positioned directly between table 14 and the dance floor. I stood there for a full minute. A couple I didn't recognize was already seated there, studying the menu card. They glanced up at me politely. Neither of them asked my name. I sat down. I straightened my tie. I placed my hands flat on the linen tablecloth and I breathed through my nose slowly, the way I learned to breathe on job sites when something went wrong and panic wasn't an option. From table 14, I could not see the head table without leaning sideways around the tripod. I could hear the music. I could see the edge of the dance floor if I craned my neck. But mostly, what I could see was the back of a photographer's jacket and the blinking red light on a camera I had not been asked to smile for once all evening. I told myself it was a mistake. I told myself the room was complicated to arrange. I told myself a lot of things sitting at that table in my polished shoes and my charcoal suit. But somewhere underneath all those careful, reasonable explanations, a quieter truth was settling into my bones like cold weather settles into an old injury. This was not a mistake, and I had been too grateful, too careful, too willing to disappear for far too long. His name was Yusuf. He appeared at table 14 about 20 minutes into the cocktail hour, unhurried, well-dressed, with the quiet ease of a man completely comfortable in his own skin. Dark blazer, no tie, the kind of calm that doesn't perform itself. He nodded at the couple across the table, pulled out the chair beside me, and sat down like he'd been expected. He glanced at the tripod, then at the lighting rig, then at the 40 feet of open floor between us and the head table where Finn and Nora sat in a golden haze of candlelight and congratulations. He didn't say anything at first, just picked up the menu card, read it briefly, set it back down. Then, without looking at me directly, he said, "You're the father, aren't you?" I turned to look at him. He was maybe 45, strong jaw, attentive eyes, the kind of face that had learned to read rooms quickly out of necessity rather than curiosity. "How did you know?" I asked. He glanced at me sideways with the faintest trace of something, not pity, not amusement, recognition maybe. "Because you're the only person in this room who looks like he's holding something in." I looked back toward the head table. Finn was laughing at something his new brother-in-law had said. He looked radiant, happy. I hadn't caught his eye once since the ceremony ended. "Harrison," I said, and extended my hand. "Yusuf." Firm handshake, direct. We sat in silence for a moment that should have been uncomfortable but wasn't. The band started a soft jazz number. Waiters moved through the room like quiet rivers, filling glasses, delivering plates to the important tables first. Then Yusuf said it, quietly. No drama, no build-up. Like he was simply stating an observable fact about the weather. "Stand up, like you belong here." 4 words. I looked at him. He looked back at me steadily. He wasn't challenging me. He wasn't performing sympathy. He was simply offering me something I had apparently forgotten I was allowed to have. My own dignity. Something cracked open in my chest. Not dramatically, not like the movies. Just a slow, deep fracture. The kind that happens when something has been under pressure for a very long time. And I started talking. I don't know exactly why. I'm not a man who talks easily about himself. I've spent 30 years being the strong one, the steady one, the one who handles things quietly and doesn't ask for recognition. But something about Yusuf's stillness, his directness, the complete absence of pity in his eyes, it opened a door I had kept bolted for years. I told him everything. About Finn's mother leaving when Finn was 7, about the construction work, the double shifts, the years I ate cheap and drove old so Finn could have new shoes and school trips and eventually a college education I paid for in full. I told him about the 5 years of Nora, how she was organized, intelligent, and quietly, systematically efficient at repositioning things, repositioning me. How every family gathering slowly shifted away from my house, how phone calls with Finn got shorter, how I had told myself each time that this was just what happened when your son built his own life and you were supposed to be proud of that and stay out of the way. How tonight I had driven 2 hours in a polished suit and found table 14. Yusuf listened to all of it without interrupting once. Not a single or wow or sympathetic tilt of the head. Just steady, focused attention. The kind of listening that costs something from the person doing it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "A man who raises a son alone for 30 years doesn't sit at table 14, Harrison. That's not humility. That's a wound you've been taught to accept." I sat with those words, felt them land somewhere real. Then I asked him the obvious question. How did you end up at table 14? He smiled, slight, controlled. That, he said, is a longer story. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolled briefly, then paused and looked at me with an expression that I would only fully understand 10 minutes later when he showed me what was on that screen. "Tell me something," he said carefully. "How much do you actually know about how this seating chart was arranged?" I felt something shift in the room, or maybe just inside me. "Not much," I admitted. "Nora handled all of it." Yusuf nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he already suspected. "I thought so," he said quietly. And then he turned the phone screen toward me. The phone screen glowed between us like a lit fuse. It was an email thread, forwarded, dated 8 months ago, with a subject line that read, "Wedding seating, final draft, Vi 3. I leaned in slowly, the way you lean toward something you're not entirely sure you want to see clearly. My name was in the 3rd paragraph, Harrison Cole, father of groom. Table 14. I read it once, then I read it again because the first time didn't fully process. My brain kept trying to reroute it, trying to find the innocent explanation, the clerical error, the misunderstanding that would make this something other than what it clearly was. Then I reached the final note at the bottom of the thread. A message from Nora to the wedding planner, typed casually, like she was confirming a napkin color. "Harrison can sit near the back. He'll understand. He's not really a front-of-room person." I stared at that sentence for a long time. He's not really a front-of-room person. 30 years. 30 years of early mornings and late nights and skipped holidays and quiet sacrifices so enormous I had stopped counting them, because counting them felt like weakness. 30 years reduced to a single administrative decision made by a woman I had welcomed into my family with open hands. I set the phone down on the tablecloth carefully, like it was something fragile. Or maybe I was. "Where did you get this?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. Yusuf explained it calmly, without any theatrical buildup. He had worked with Nora's father, Gerald, 3 years earlier in commercial real estate, a significant deal. 2 years of groundwork, a development project in the Northeast that Yusuf had sourced, structured, and brought to the table. At the final stage, Gerald had quietly redirected the commission through Nora's name, keeping it internal, keeping it clean, keeping Yusuf on the outside of money he had legitimately earned. No confrontation, no explanation. Just a door that closed in his face so smoothly he almost didn't hear it shut. He had moved on professionally. He was that kind of man, composed, strategic, not given to public grievance. But when Gerald's assistant had mistakenly forwarded the wedding coordination email chain to Yusuf's business address 3 months ago, he had read it. And when he saw my name tucked at table 14 with that note attached, he hadn't deleted it. "I didn't know what I was going to do with it," Yusuf said. "I wasn't planning anything. I just knew it was wrong, and I kept it." He looked at me directly. "Then I walked into this reception hall tonight and I found myself at table 14, and there you were. And I thought, maybe I kept it for a reason." I looked across the room at Gerald. He was seated at table 2, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man who filled a room with his certainty. He was mid-laugh at something, his hand on the shoulder of the man beside him. He hadn't looked in my direction once all evening. Then I looked at Nora, composed, radiant, every detail of her presentation considered and controlled. She was leaning close to Finn, whispering something, and he was smiling down at her with complete and uncomplicated trust. And that's when the question I had been avoiding all night forced itself forward. Did Finn know? I turned it over carefully. I knew my son. I knew the texture of his character, the boy who cried when we had to give away a stray dog we'd found, the teenager who worked a summer job to buy me a birthday gift, the young man who called me every time something went right or wrong in his life. That Finn, my Finn, could not have looked at a seating chart and placed his father behind a tripod and felt nothing. But people change inside relationships. They outsource decisions to the person they trust most. They tell themselves the details are handled and stop looking at the details. Maybe Finn had never seen the chart. Maybe he had seen it and said nothing. I needed to know which one it was, because those two possibilities led to very different places inside me. I folded my hands on the table, breathed slowly. "What do you think I should do?" I asked Yusuf, not because I didn't have my own answer forming, but because I wanted to hear what a man who had been through his own version of this would say. Yusuf was quiet for a moment, then, "I think you should let the evening show you what people are made of. Don't force anything, just stop disappearing." He picked up his wine glass, took a measured sip. "The truth has a way of finding the light," he said, "especially in rooms full of people." I looked toward the microphone stand near the dance floor, the one the MC had announced earlier would be open for guest speeches after dinner. Something was already forming in the back of my mind. Not rage, not revenge in any loud, destructive sense. Something quieter and more precise than that. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to confront anyone publicly or wave that email thread like a flag. But I was done disappearing. And across the room, without knowing any of this, a young woman named Maya had just picked up her dessert fork, looked over at table 14, and made a decision of her own. Maya was 38 years old, and she had never once in her life said less than exactly what she meant. She was Finn's cousin on his mother's side, sharp-featured, natural hair, the kind of quiet intensity that made people slightly nervous without knowing why. She was a writer, essays mostly, the kind that circulated online and made strangers feel uncomfortably seen. She had been seated at table 7, not front row, but respectable, close enough to observe everything. She had texted me during cocktail hour. I felt my phone buzz in my jacket pocket and checked it under the table. "Maya, why are you sitting back there?" I had stared at the message for a moment, then put the phone back in my pocket without responding. I didn't have an answer I was ready to type out, but Maya didn't need my answer. She had eyes. I watched her through dinner without meaning to, the way you watch the one person in a room who seems to be paying attention to the same things you are. She ate quietly. She observed the room with that particular stillness of someone cataloging details. Twice, I saw her look at the head table. Once, I saw her look at Gerald. And several times, with an expression I couldn't fully read from 40 feet away, she looked at table 14. She looked at me in my suit behind the tripod, next to Yusuf, who was now the only person in this building who knew my full name and the full shape of what this evening had cost me. The speeches began after dinner. Nora's mother went first, polished, emotional in a performed sort of way, a speech that had clearly been workshopped. She said Nora was her greatest achievement. She did not mention Finn's family once. Gerald spoke next, confident, generous with his words, a man completely at ease commanding a room. He welcomed Finn into the family warmly and at length. He did not look at table 14. 2 of Finn's college friends went genuinely funny, warm, unrehearsed in the best way. The room loosened up. Laughter rolled through the tables. Even I smiled twice. Then the MC invited any remaining guests to the microphone. A pause. The comfortable kind where everyone assumes the speeches are done and the dancing is next. Then Maya stood up. She walked to the microphone the way she did everything. Without hurry, without performance, with the complete assurance of someone who has already decided. She adjusted the mic height, smiled at the room, easy, open, unthreatening. She started with Finn, a story from childhood, the summer he was 12, and convinced himself he could build a working go-kart from YouTube tutorials alone. The catastrophic, glorious failure of that go-kart. The room laughed freely. Finn covered his face with both hands and laughed too. Even Nora smiled. Maya let the laughter settle, then she paused. That pause had weight. I felt it from table 14 like a change in air pressure. "I want to take a moment," she said, her voice dropping into something quieter and more deliberate, "to acknowledge someone in this room who hasn't been acknowledged once tonight. Not during cocktail hour, not during dinner, not in a single speech." The room shifted, that specific collective shift of 200 people realizing simultaneously that something unscripted is happening. This man raised Finn alone from the age of 7. He worked construction for 30 years. He never missed a game, a graduation, a hard conversation. He drove 2 hours to be here tonight in a beautiful suit. She looked directly at table 14, at me. And he has been seated behind the photography equipment for the entire evening. The silence was total. The kind of silence that has texture. I saw Hazel, Nora's sister, at table 2 as put her champagne glass down slowly. I saw Gerald's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. I saw the wedding planner near the side wall go very still. And I saw Finn. I watched his face move through expressions too fast to name individually. Confusion first, then searching the room, then finding table 14, finding the tripod, finding me sitting there in my charcoal suit with my hands flat on the tablecloth, and then understanding. Full, terrible, complete understanding. His face did something I had not seen it do since he was 7 years old, standing in that kitchen doorway. It broke. "Harrison," Maya said into the microphone, her eyes steady on mine. "Finn's dad. Would you please stand up?" I stood up, slowly, fully. Behind the tripod, in my polished shoes, in the suit I had checked 4 times in the mirror that morning, 200 people turned to look at me, and in that enormous silence, before anyone began to applaud, before Finn pushed back his chair, before anything else happened, I looked at my son across that room. And for the first time all evening, he saw me. Finn was on his feet before I even fully straightened up. I watched him rise from that head table, 6'1" in his wedding tuxedo, napkin still in his hand, chair scraping back loud enough to cut through the silence. And I felt the entire room hold its breath with me. 200 people, all of them watching, all of them understanding that whatever happened in the next 60 seconds was real and unrehearsed and could not be taken back. Nora reached up and touched his arm, gently, instinctively, the way you touch someone when you need them to stay put. He looked down at her hand, then he looked back at me, and he walked. The photographer, a young woman who had been shooting candids near the dance floor, stepped sideways without being asked, clearing the path between the head table and table 14, like she understood instinctively that this particular shot required no lens. This one was just human, just a man walking across a room toward his father. I didn't move. I stood beside my chair with my hands at my sides, and I watched my son come to me, and I kept my face as steady as I could because I had spent 30 years being the steady one, and I was not going to stop now in front of 200 strangers. He stopped in front of me, close, the way he used to stand when he was small and needed to tell me something difficult. His eyes were red. Not crying. Finn never cried easily. I had raised him in a house where emotions were real, but composure was respected. But red at the rims, glassy, the unmistakable look of a man fighting himself. He said it quietly enough that only I could hear it beneath the silence. "Dad." I didn't know. 3 words, and I believed them completely. That was the hardest part, not doubting him for even a second. Because I knew my son's face better than I knew my own. I had studied it for 30 years. I knew the difference between his discomfort and his guilt, between his embarrassment and his shame. What I was looking at right now was shame, deep, genuine, the particular devastation of a good person who has allowed something wrong to happen through absence of attention rather than absence of love. He hadn't known. Nora had handled the details, and he had trusted her with the details, and he had never looked closely enough at the chart that bore his father's name in the back corner. I nodded, once, slowly. And then Finn turned to face the room. He didn't clear his throat, didn't ask for the microphone. He just spoke into that extraordinary silence with a voice that carried the way voices carry when they're backed by something unshakable. My father sat at table 14 tonight, behind the cameras. That was a mistake that should never have happened, and I should have caught it. A beat, no shuffling, no glasses clinking, nothing. This man raised me alone from the time I was 7 years old. He never once asked me to thank him for it. He never once made me feel like I owed him anything. He just showed up every single day and made sure I knew I was loved and I was safe. His voice tightened on that last word. He pushed through it. He deserves the seat closest to me in every room he ever walks into for the rest of his life. He turned to the head table, to the empty chair beside him, the one that had been reserved for Nora's aunt who had canceled last minute, the one that had sat empty all evening like an accusation. "Dad," he said, "come sit with me." I heard Gerald shift in his chair at table 2, a small sound, the beginning of a word, the instinct of a man accustomed to controlling outcomes. But Yusuf, still seated calmly at table 14 beside where I'd been sitting, turned and looked at Gerald with an expression so quiet and so absolutely loaded that Gerald completed nothing. He settled back. He picked up his wine glass. He said nothing. I walked to the head table. A waiter materialized from somewhere and set a full place beside Finn before I even reached the chair. Silver cutlery, folded napkin, a fresh glass. I have no idea how he moved that fast. Some people are extraordinary at their jobs. I sat down beside my son. The applause started slowly and the way real applause starts. Not the polite kind that begins on cue, but the kind that builds from individual people making individual decisions to put their hands together because something true just happened in front of them. It grew until it filled the room completely. I looked straight ahead, kept my jaw tight, kept my hands flat on the linen. Beside me, Finn put his hand briefly on my shoulder. One firm press, the way men in our family had always said the things that were too large for words. I covered his hand with mine for just a moment. Then I looked down the head table at Nora. She was not applauding. She sat perfectly composed, expression arranged with the practiced control of someone who has never once let a room see her rattled. She looked straight ahead at no particular point. Her champagne glass remained untouched. Behind her eyes, I could see it. The rapid, silent recalculation of a very organized mind suddenly confronted with a variable it had not accounted for. She had not expected Finn to stand up. She had not expected Maya. She had not expected any of this, and I realized, sitting there at the head table beside my son with 200 people still applauding behind me, that I didn't need her to apologize tonight. I didn't need a scene or a confession or a dramatic reckoning in front of the wedding photographer. I had my seat. I had my son. Tonight, that was everything. 3 weeks after the wedding, a handwritten letter arrived at my house. No return address. My name on the envelope in careful, deliberate cursive, the handwriting of someone who had restarted the pen several times before committing. I stood at the mailbox for a moment before opening it. Something in the weight of the envelope told me to sit down first. I went inside, made coffee I didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Finn and I had eaten 1,000 dinners, done homework, had every hard conversation two people can have, and I opened it. 4 pages. Handwritten. Nora. She didn't open with an apology, I'll give her this. She wasn't a woman who offered hollow words cheaply. She opened with a statement of fact. Plain and undecorated. I made a decision about you without ever once asking who you were. That was wrong. She wrote about her father, about growing up in Gerald's house where worth was visible, measurable, and publicly displayed, where the people who mattered sat at the front and the people who didn't were managed efficiently toward the edges. She had absorbed it so completely she had stopped being able to see it as a choice. It had simply become the way rooms were arranged. She wrote that when she looked at me, she had seen, without ever examining why, a quiet man in work clothes who didn't summer anywhere, who didn't have the right references, who wouldn't photograph well against the aesthetic she had planned. She had categorized me, filed me at table 14, and moved on to the next decision. She wrote, "I told myself you wouldn't mind. The truth is, I never asked. I made that choice for you without your knowledge, and I called it logistics. No performance, no excessive self-flagellation, just a woman writing clearly about a thing she had done and the mechanism inside her that had produced it." The final paragraph was short. "I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not writing to ask for it. I'm writing because Finn showed me a photograph from the reception, the one taken right after you sat down at the head table beside him. I have been looking at it for 3 weeks. You both have the same jaw. I never noticed that before. I think I had stopped looking." I folded the letter, set it on the table, sat with it for a full day. Then I called Finn, not to discuss the letter. I never showed it to him, never told him its contents. That was between Nora and me, and some things deserve to stay that way. We just talked, the way we used to talk before the world got complicated. He told me Nora had started seeing a therapist, her own decision, nobody's suggestion, that she was working through things that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the house she grew up in. I told him I was glad. I meant it. Yusuf came to my birthday dinner in November. Small gathering, my kitchen, the good plates I only use when it matters. He brought an excellent bottle of red and stayed until midnight, and we didn't talk about the wedding once. We talked about his work, my retirement plans, a road trip I was considering out west. He laughed loudly at something I said, and the sound of it filled the kitchen, and I thought, this is how you end up with people worth keeping. Through the table, 14 moments, through the nights that reveal what everyone is actually made of. Maya published a piece about a month later. She didn't use real names. She called it "The Seat They Gave Him." And it traveled quietly across the internet and landed in the inboxes of people who recognize themselves in every paragraph. She sent me the link without comment. I read it once, felt something loosen in my chest, and never brought it up. Finn calls every Sunday, without exception. This past Sunday, he called from the car, Nora beside him, driving somewhere together, and he put me on speaker, and she said simply and without rehearsal, "Hi, Harrison." 2 words, but they were genuine. And I have learned at 64 after everything, that genuine is the only currency that actually holds its value. I still have the letter. It's in the kitchen drawer beneath the spare batteries and the takeout menus. Some nights I think about table 14, about the man who sat there in his polished shoes, holding a card with his table number, telling himself it was probably just a mistake. I think about Yusuf leaning over and saying 4 quiet words. I think about Maya standing up. I think about Finn walking across that room, and I think about what I know now that I did not know that morning when I checked my tie 4 times in the mirror. You cannot wait for the people who diminished you to restore your dignity. You have to stand up like you belong there, because you do. You always did. If Harrison's story reached something real in you, if you've ever been someone's table 14, then this channel is exactly where you need to be. Every week we bring you stories like this, real, human, cinematic. Stories about dignity, quiet strength, and the moments that define who we are when everything is on the line. Subscribe right now. Hit the bell so you never miss a story. Like this if Harrison deserved that seat. Comment 1 word that describes how this story made you feel. Just 1 word. I want to read every single one. Share this with one person who needs to hear it today. Next week's story is already waiting for you, and I promise it hits just as hard. See you there.